Hi everyone, today I'm going to show you how to paint plein air using gouache. This will be especially helpful to both oil painters as well as watercolorists and acrylic painters. I find many artists are unsure or afraid of gouache, and this video will hopefully help clear up some of the uncertainties and misconceptions about painting with gouache. Gouache is very similar to watercolor as they both have the same main ingredients, which is the pigment and gum arabic as the binder. After sketching out my scene, I start by wetting the page, and I want to lay in big washes of paint. One misconception about gouache is that you can't paint transparently or dilute the paint, and that isn't quite true. In fact, any pigment without mixing in white will have some transparency to it, and you can use big wet washes and do wet and wet techniques just as you would with in watercolor. I'm mixing up some blues for the sky and gray down purples for the shadows of the clouds, and by wetting the page ahead of time and letting the paint be very wet and diluted, I'm able to get some very soft edges and transparent gradients of tone. This is just how I chose to paint the sky, but if you wanted to paint it opaquely like you would in oils or acrylics, you can absolutely do that as well quite easily by mixing your paint with white and getting the appropriate tone for the sky that you wanted. But now I want to switch to the foreground and add in my darks and shadows to create a sense of depth and three-dimensionality. This is sort of similar to how I might do a painting in oil paint. Since I can layer lights on tops of darks just like I can with oils, it makes sense to establish the pattern of light and shadow and slowly work to render the forms. I'm mixing up a mixture of alizarin crimson and ultramarine blue for a purplish hue, and I find that a purplish mixture gives us a cool red to complement greens that you see in a landscape, and this tends to create a sense of vibrancy in a painting that I enjoy. I find if you have too many greens in a painting, it can lack interest, so I'm adding a little color into my shadows, and I will go in and adjust them as I go. Once my shadows are established, I wash in local colors to the rest of the area just to cover up the page, and I will build upon these layers in the next step. Just like with oil or acrylic, you might use your brush to play across the surface of the canvas to suggest different textures in the landscape. We can achieve similar results by dragging the brush loaded with thicker paint across the texture of the paper. Just like in oil painting, if you work thin to thick, it's easier to layer the paint on. At this point, the under layers of the painting have dried, but they can reactivate if I scrub in too hard. That's why having a loaded brush will help laying the paint down as I paint in just the suggestion of detail going in the foreground on these trees and grasses and ground textures. One thing that's really nice about gouache as opposed to oil or acrylic is that even after it's dry, I can still go back in and reactivate it with water. This can be an asset or it can be a trouble spot depending on your case use, but I find that here, gouache's ability to reactivate can really help. Now that I've got my foreground laid in, I want to reinforce those distant trees, and I also want to maintain soft edges in the atmosphere I had before, so I'll re-wet the page, and I can drop in some darker tones to give the appearance of trees in the middle ground. But because I re-wet the page, they will still blend in nice and soft. You always want to think about hard and soft edges. I think one of the biggest assets of using gouache is being able to drop in highlights over darks. That's why I'm reasserting the highlights in the clouds to make more definition in the sky, and also the darks of this dead tree and scumbling in little textures here and there to give it more detail. If you can do me a favor, please hit the like button and let me know in the comments, have you tried gouache before? And if not, what questions do you have about it? I'll try to answer some of your questions in another video. Gouache is super fun, and it's an easy addendum to any painter's arsenal, whether you're coming from water media like watercolor or acrylic, or you can use almost all the same techniques you normally would, but in the case of gouache, you have the ability to rework it after it's dried and layer light colors over darks. This allows you to make corrections as you go, and it can be very useful. For the oil painter, you have all the same case uses as oil, but you can work with something that will dry quickly, and you can work in layers and still explore wet and wet techniques. If you'd like to try painting with gouache yourself, I'm going to leave some links down in the description where you can get all the supplies you need to get going. Remember, you have a voice that matters. Go be creative. I'll see you next time.